So it's wonderful to be here with you today, Marcus. I've been really, really looking forward to this conversation. We're going to talk, of course, about all things culture, cultural engagement, and why that matters when you're looking to inspire behavioral change from getting people to think, act, and ultimately buy differently. Congratulations on your book, which I have right here, For the Culture, the power behind the world's most successful brands from Apple to Beyonce. It is a barnstormer of a book. It's a tour de force. It's very well researched. You're clearly on a mission. It has a pace and an urgency to it. It's very action focused, and it's a beautiful to read. And it clearly has a lot of personal anecdotes and stories in it too. So many, many congratulations.
I'm so grateful for all of it. And I'm really, really happy to be with you to discuss the book and all the things adjacent to it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, you describe yourself, of course, as a marketeer, but as a cultural translator, which I love that term, which goes, obviously, it's coherent with the book and all your work. You obviously have a foot in the world of practice. You were formerly the chief strategy officer of Eden and Kennedy in New York, and also in academia. In terms of your role as marketing professor at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. I love that combination. It's something I try and do myself. And of course, you've had a very varied career, even however youthful you are and look, going all the way back to your days in this, where you co-founded a startup and in your experiments in music and technology. And then ultimately, one of your gigs was running digital strategy for Beyonce, as you do. Welcome to the show again, Marcus. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
So let's just set this up to make sure we're all on the same page. I mean, we talk about culture. We often talk about culture loosely, but I'm keen for you to sort of define it and frame it clearly in terms of what it means and why it matters in the context of that behavioral change. And perhaps you can delve into the three systems that you allude to in the book. Let's just start there.
So the question you ask is really the impetus of why I wrote the book. Culture is a word we often use, but seldom fully understand. And I get it. I mean, culture it's abstract. It is esoteric. It's omnipresent. And when something is that wide, that intangible, we start to use loose language to describe it, even though we know it intuitively. But without language, without having a Rosetta Stone to describe a thing, that we don't really have the opportunity to fully harness its power. So I think about culture through a Durkheimian lens. Emil Durkheim, one of the founding fathers of sociology, he talks about culture as a system of conventions and expectations that demarcate who we are and what people like us do. And if you fast forward maybe a little shy of a century later, a gentleman by the name of Raymond Williams, he talks about culture as a system of systems. Right? A system of systems that in each one of these systems are a set of conventions and expectations that the alchemy of these things ultimately lead to what one would call culture, right? One would call a system, operating system that governs human behavior. And that system is made up of three different systems. So it's anchored in our identity because of who I am, how I self-identify. I then, therefore, adopt a set of beliefs and ideologies. Beliefs are the truths that I tell myself about the world, and the ideologies are the stories that I tell myself about the world based on those truths. And typically, my identity, and people like me, we're the characters in the story, often the protagonists, right? So because of who I am, I have a certain set of beliefs and ideologies about the world, a way of seeing the world, frames by which I translate the world. And because I see the world a certain way, I show up in the world a certain way through the artifacts that I don, the behaviors that are normative, and the language that I use, right? These things become outward expressions of inward beliefs, right? They become outward demonstrations of the ideologies and truths that I hold about the world. And then I express my cultural subscription through shared works, productions, creations, right? What we often, what the literature refer to as cultural production. This is the literature that we read, the art that we observe, the dance that we take on, the music we listen to, the film we watch, the podcasts we consume, comic books, and of course, brands and branded products. They are expressions of our cultural subscription, and they also reflect, help us socialize what the conventions and expectations are of what it means to be a good standing citizen within these communities, social groups, institutions, organizations, and the like. And the alchemy of which these three systems come together like Voltron to make up our culture, and they govern every ounce of social living is informed by, governed by this system of systems.
That's brilliant. That is the synthesis of your book in about 2.5 minutes. I mean, that's brilliant and very intuitive. And that's not a critique. That's a compliment. And it makes me wonder what leads marketeers and other professionals to take shortcuts, which you allude to. I mean, you're critical in a way of your own profession. No wonder you've left your role in one of the agencies. No, I'm joking. But given how brilliant and clear and intuitive that is, what goes wrong then in other ways, the traditional ways of marketing?
Because I think so. Marketing is the act of going to market, and we go to market to get people to adopt behavior. And culture is so important in that calculus because there is no external force more influential to human behavior than culture, right? Culture is these invisible forces that tell us to buy this, not that, drink this, not that, vote for him, not for her, to do all these things that we do in life. But to understand these conventions and expectations, these beliefs, ideologies, social facts, as Durkheim refers to as artifacts, behaviors, and language, and the cultural production, it requires a tremendous amount of intimacy. And getting
Yes.
that intimacy, getting that level of closeness to a group of people, it requires a lot of work. And marketers do not want to do that work. Right. I mean,
So how do
we
you do that
abide.
then? So how do you that intimacy, which is a common theme throughout the book, of course, and you illustrate it with some very powerful stories. Um, you've got a corporate client or any form of client who ultimately want some form of results, and will probably get, once you've conveyed brilliantly your overall framework, how you need that intimacy and that cultural engagement. But it takes time. So how do you marry the two, the
Yeah.
urgency and the fact that it takes proper work?
So I think that is the Achilles heel for many marketers, is that there are perverse incentives that force us to hit our numbers by the end of the month, hit our numbers by the end of the quarter,
Mm.
and therefore the idea of something that takes effort, time, feels like something that we shy away from, and
Mm.
a developing intimacy with a group with people requires time and tons of effort. Lightweight interactions over a period of time are how relationships are built, and we learn more about people by spending time with people, right? I
Yes.
know the idiosyncratic, quirks about my wife because we've been together for almost 11 years married, and 3 years before that, right? And when my wife says, you always do this when you're eating, I go, really? I didn't even realize that. But she has that level of intimacy with me because she's with me in proximity, but also she pays attention,
Yeah.
she observes. And this is how marketers, brands, institutions, organizations, companies, this is how we get to intimacy. We first have to observe people. We observe them closely with intentionality. And then we look at them not like boxes that we put a label on, i.e., demographics, but instead we look at them as real life human beings with a level of empathy that allows us to see the world through their lenses. So as we observe them as not test subjects, but we observe the subjects as social actors that are active in life based on their social gatherings. And as we observe these people as real life human beings, we then say, "Oh, I understand. I get it. I get it." What may seem weird to you, David, may be cool to me. And what
Mm.
may seem lame to me may be really cool to you, right?
Mm.
These things are subjective in nature. And the only way that we understand subjectivity is see the world through the lens of the meaning makers. And what dictates meaning?
Mm.
Culture.
Absolutely. Let's just drill down even further, because what you said there is it requires, I guess, determination, requires patience, real curiosity
Oh,
in
yeah.
the people you're looking to engage. Um, how do you build this sufficient trust once you've observed to actually to encourage people
Yeah.
to reveal and
Yeah.
share?
Yeah.
Because often companies sort of just say, "Oh, here's the deal. Here's a deal or something. Sign up, do it, and
That's right.
so on." And it's like, well, gee, it's very transactional. But what you're looking for is a much deeper relationship.
Absolutely. I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. It's the difference between a transactional relationship and a meaningful relationship. Transactional relationship is exchange, right? And that's an economically driven uh, 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 interaction between people. But
Mm.
meaning is signified, and we signify things based on our ability to translate it, to interpret it, and it to manifest itself in different contexts. Right? It's the
Mm.
same reason why. It's the same reason why if your friend goes on a first date and comes back and says, "I'm engaged," you go, "What? You crazy." There's no way, there's no way this relationship is going to work. Why? Because we know intuitively that it takes more time to
Mm.
develop the trust by which marriage is built on,
Mm. Mm.
than just having one date.
Mm.
Right? You got to experience the person over time. You got to see them in different contexts. You got to get to know who they are because you watch them, observe them, be themselves in these different situations. And the
Mm.
same thing goes with brands. There's a great construct, this definition for trust that I absolutely love, and I quote it all the time, is that trust is the mechanism that absorbs uncertainty. It
Mm.
absorbs
Mm.
uncertainty. It absorbs I don't know. I don't know what David's going to do. I don't know. Well, how do we get to a place where we do know? Well, we get
Mm.
to a place when we do know because that person, that company, that technology, that institution, that organization has demonstrated themselves repeatedly, consistently over time. So
Mm.
I go, oh, David said he'll be there at 5. It's 2 to 5. Oh man, should I call him, check in? No, because he's always here at 5, like he says he's going to do. Right? He does what he says he's going to do. That is, he's demonstrated himself over time,
Yes.
such that any uncertainty that I have is now absorbed because of this thing called trust. And the same thing goes with brands. If we want to be able to fortify the connections that are facilitated because of trust, then it requires consistency. It
Mm.
requires uh, demonstrated values and conviction, and that only happens if we spend time together.
Yeah, spend time together, and because you're so close and immersed in the cultural communities, if you like, congregations, I should say,
That's right.
that you're in. If you like, you're in the mix. You're not on the mix, sort of directing it.
That's
And
right.
so, in some ways, you have to be not only consistent, but you have to be really, really careful, because you're at a deeper relationship, and so one false move, it could be a campaign that's just, oh, that doesn't really sit with me. And
That's right.
how do you, given you're in that position of trust and intimacy, how do you, over time, year on year, as companies they want to develop brands, they want to improve their overall business, how do you maintain that trust and that consistency when actually, people in agencies, people in corporates change and move, the market moves? How do you keep that quality and those
Yeah.
qualities alive?
So being able to identify the nuances again requires just so great proximity. And because these beliefs, these artifacts, these behaviors, these language, and even the cultural production changes for a group of people, sometimes rapidly, you have to be there as a resident, not as a tourist,
Yes,
right?
that's a great way of
we
putting it.
go
Yeah,
do research and we say, I'm going to study these groups of people. And we go study them for 2 weeks. And then we go, great, we know them. And then we walk away and we don't see them
exactly.
for another year until we do another research undertaking. It's like, well, if you want to know who these people are, and understand sort of the governing operating system of who they are, then you can't look at just what's happening in the undercurrent, like beneath the surface. You have to also watch what's going on a day-to-day basis. The agency I used to work for, White and Kennedy, the founding client was Nike, and they worked at Nike for 40 some odd years. And Nike doesn't say, "Yep, we know athletes. We're done here. We'll talk to you later, athletes." No, Nike is constantly in discourse with athletes. I didn't work on the business while I was at Wyden, but what I've often been told is that the strategists won't write a brief until they've talked to an athlete. They said oftentimes the way in, the idea, the sort of the tension actually comes from the athlete's mouth without them even knowing. The athlete just talks and they go, "Oh, that's it. Right there. That's it." And it's the knowing who these people are and our closeness to them that allows us to extract where the opportunity exists.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the job of a researcher when it comes to qualitative research, particularly when we study culture, is that we are the research instrument. Right? We are the ones who look at the dots and connect them and say, this is what is really going on here. And then here's where our opportunity might be to interact with it. So instead of being on it, we're in it, observing it, almost going native, if you will.
I love that. Now, I come from a background in sort of strategy and organizational transformation. And when I was reading your book, my first reaction, apart from just thoroughly enjoying it and just keep turning the pages like what's coming next, my other reaction was, gosh, surely these concepts, framings, and anecdotes can apply to organizational change. Yet, if you think how traditional strategy or culture work is done in an organization, it suffers from many of the shortfalls that you allude to. Am I right? Am I wrong? Do you think what you described can apply to organization? Are you going to be doing organizational transformation next, as well as your gigs with marketeers and others?
Absolutely. This is sort of one of the ambitions of the book, is to look at culture not through a myopic lens of consumption culture, but there's organizational culture, there's familial culture, there's political culture, right? There, in each one of these institutions and organizations, there are a set of conventions and expectations that govern our behavior, not just what we buy, but what policies we adopt, who we vote for, right? And whether we vote or not, right? These things are all byproducts of our cultural subscriptions. So what's gotten me really excited today as a scholar and even as a practitioner is applying this thinking to more contexts than just marketing. And when it comes to organizational culture, you'll hear companies say, "We have a great culture here. We have a foosball table in the kitchen." It's like, that's not culture. That may be a byproduct of a belief. That may be byproducts of a shared way of life, but that isn't culture. The fact that you do summer Fridays isn't culture. That's a byproduct of the cultural subscription. That is a demonstrative act of the cultural subscription. And my hope with the book and the work that I do from a consultation perspective is to help companies have the language so that they can interrogate what they do with some level of specificity, and also understand what are the mechanisms that make up culture so that we might be able to have agency to do something about it.
Yes. I think there's a great opportunity for you there. Now let's continue on that theme then. So imagine you were, somebody had read your book, listened to this brilliant podcast, and the CEO, she came to you and said, "Look, I'm looking to grow my business. Things are going okay, but I've really got big ambitions, clear purpose, big financial ambitions, and other impacts I want to have on the world." Obviously, it's a generic situation, but just what would be the sort of the top things on the top of your, the tongue what you'd love to say to her as she's looking to be ambitious? What would you convey to her?
First thing I'd say is, what do you believe? What's the conviction? And I specifically use the word conviction and not purpose.
Yes, okay.
Because purpose is something that we have, but conviction denotes something that we do. When we are
Mm,
convicted, we stand firmly on a thing. I
mm,
stand on this thing. It's not just having a thing, is that I stand on it. And because I stand on it, I am unmovable when it comes to it. That is, no matter the adversity, no matter the opposition, no matter downward trending business, I'm going to do this because this is what I believe. Start there,
mm,
right?
mm,
And conviction that even if I'm the only one, I'm going to stand on this thing. And then say, okay, if this is your conviction, this is what you believe, this is how you see the world, this becomes the North Star to everything you do as a company.
mm,
It not only informs the product goods or product services that you bring to market, it also informs who you hire. It also informs how you run your
mm,
business, right?
mm,
How the norms, like the folklore,
mm.
the more ways, all the things that are the folk ways and the mores, all the things that govern how the organization functions and the kind of clients that you'll have
Yes.
and or the kind of customers that you have, at least that you talk to. Now there's people who are going to buy your stuff that you're not talking to. That's fine. But where you spend your attention, your time, your effort, you are talking to the congregation who believes the same gospel that you do. And your job as the CEO is to preach the gospel and
Mm.
ensure that the organization is living up to the gospel, that they are walking the talk. But it's your job, CEO, to go preach the gospel far and wide.
As they're doing that, what does she need to avoid?
She needs to avoid compromising short term gains for long term successes.
Mm,
And those things should not be in opposition. I think we often think about them as like a false bifurcation, like they're binary. Should I think about the
mm,
short term or the long term? It's like, well, you do both, right? Like if you have a fruit tree, you grow the fruit and you eat it too. Like you do the both, right? Now you can't eat all the fruit before it grows because then you have no fruit, and you can't just let the fruit grow and do nothing with it because you need to eat. But it's the two together, and I think that we often say, well, this works well for me right now, and I make a lot of money right now. And I go, great, but what's the trade off? Because everything's a trade off. Every decision we make is a trade off. And what we're saying is that you are investing in a long term horizon. Brand is a long term thing, right? This company, it's a long term thing, it's a long term horizon. And I'm making decisions today for the future. And though the time horizons are different, they're both guided and informed by the same ideology, the same North
mm,
Star. And
mm.
that's the thing that we have to think about. Like this would be it'll be a good bag right now. Good night. It'll be great for us right now, but it may hurt us in the future. Well, we are future looking, but present acting.
Yes, that's a great way to frame it. That that longer term perspective, I guess, brings into sharp relief sometimes some of the impacts, the wider impacts of companies that could be on the health of their people, could be on the environment, and some of the brilliant examples you share in the book, where effectively the campaigns, whether it's for McDonald's or the Barclays Centre and so on, have either increased consumption for McDonald's. And obviously had some potential environmental impacts from that from the stadium. How
Yeah.
do you, as if you're advising the CEO in a future case, to obviously do all the things around cultural engagement and to drive ultimately consumption, but be aware of the some of the more delicate ethical
Yeah.
aspects? How do you get the right balance?
Yeah. I think if I were being critical of my career, I would say that's not a part of the calculus that drove a lot of my decisions.
Right.
And when I look back, as proud as I am of the work we did with the Brooklyn Nets, I could have did better. And I often refer to that example as my one of my favorite case studies, my favorite
Mm.
campaigns put in the world, because it wasn't tied up with a bow. It wasn't, look what I did. This was great. Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
It's, this is what I did. This was great in one capacity, but there's another context that I completely avoided or
Mm.
ignored rather, that is a sort of reminder today of thinking about the ethical impact of the work that we do. And to be ethical, of course, it is subjective. Like what is morally right for you may be different for me
Yes.
based on our cultural subscription. Uh, so in the book, I specifically didn't say what right and wrong was, but instead I gave a framework to think about what the impact of my work could be. And I refer to
Yes.
it as IPO because I'm a marketing
Yeah.
professor. We try to be clever. But IPO is an acronym for intentionality,
Mm.
perspective, and outcomes.
Yes.
So I think about, well, what are my intentions in doing this thing? What do I want to come out of it? And it may be self-serving. It may be I want to make more money for my company. Okay, it stated what I want out of this. Then think about, well, what's the perspective that other people may have about what
Mm.
I'm doing?
Mm.
And that perspective, to our earlier points, requires empathy. It requires seeing the world through other people's lenses, not
Yes.
just your target audience, but all the people who will be touched, impacted, and affected by what you might do. What
Mm.
are the ways in which they'll look at your activation and make meaning of it based on their
Mm.
cultural frames? And
Mm.
then lastly, what are the potential outcomes? And when I do that math, when I do that calculus, I ask myself, is the outcome still positive?
Yeah.
Right? Is the outcome still positive? Because if it's not, then I say, is this worth it? And
I
that's
love.
the and that's
Yeah.
that's the that's the math that I would give a CEO. Say, is your making money worth compromising a already marginalized group of people? Is your making money meeting your fiduciary responsibility as a company? Is it worth the oppression of a group of people? And if you can say in your heart, yep, by all means, but you have to then
Yeah.
uh, stand account for any of the ramifications that may come from that.
Yes. I mean, you're being explicit about choices and the trade-offs involved. And I love the fact, I mean, personally, it's quite rare for guests and others for you to be honest about your own, the things you got right and perhaps the things you would do differently. So that's refreshing. But let's
Well,
let's
you gotta
continue.
be.
Well, you've got to be, but not many people do, or at least they
That's,
keep it private, which I I understand.
that's
I
fair.
mean, yeah, let's continue on this theme with the CEO because that's the audience and that's some of my clients as well. They talk about preaching, if that's their faith, or they talk about storytelling more broadly.
Yeah.
And it's one of those sort of topics that's in vogue, or has been in vogue for quite a long time, if that's possible. Probably mixing metaphors there. But not many of them are good at it. So they talk about stories, they say the power of it. They read the books, read the articles, and so on, but they struggle with it in
Yeah.
practice. In
Yeah.
your experience, why is that, and what can they change?
It's practice. You said it. You took the words right out of my mouth. Again, you're good at that. You take the words right out of my mouth. That's great.
No,
But
that's
it's
not great. I should just shut my mouth and listen to you.
nah, you've already got the right read on it. I think it is a lack of practice. We often say practice makes perfect, but I don't think that's right. I think it's practice makes patterns and patterns make routine, right? And the
Mm,
more we do a thing, the more routine it comes.
mm,
And storytelling is something that we innately do. I mean, we're storytelling machines, we're storytelling animals, right? We've been telling stories since the beginning of time. Before there was science, we use stories, right? And then we communicate the science through stories, just because of how easily stories are at help socializing thing or socialization of ideas. The challenge, however, is that though it's very human for us to tell stories, that when we get into business environments, we take off our human hat and put on our business hat.
yes, yes,
CEO time, Marcus,
yes.
I'll see you after work. But now I'm CEO Marcus. And we lose our humanity. We lose the things that make us human.
Mm,
That's why it's easy for us to put people in boxes, because we know that not everybody's the same. We know that not everyone born in a 20-year period is the same. We know this intuitively. However, when we're in the business role, we go millennials, Gen Zs, and Gen Xers, they're all different and they're all the same. That's ridiculous, right? And just like we know when we hear a good story and when a story sucks.
yeah.
But when we're in a business setting, we change our identity.
Mm.
And then therefore our accompanying behaviors and the way by which we translate the world changes as well. But I tell my clients this all the time. Look, Batman and Bruce Wayne are the same people. They're just wearing different outfits. And the same thing goes with you. Like, you are the same person. You are a human. Keep your human hat on when you walk into the boardroom to be a CEO. And the same stories that you ingest as a Joe Schmo walking through the aisle to who watches Netflix, and the same stories you tell your friends and family over dinner. These are the same kind of stories that we tell to our customers, our
Yes,
consumers, our employees, our partners, and our stakeholders.
that's great counsel. When I was reading your book and looking at your coverage, one question came to mind was, how disruptive is your thinking and practice to the world of marketing and communications, let alone strategy and organization? On a scale of one to 10, go on, I'm a quant by background. How disruptive would you put it?
I think that I would give it a 6, modestly speaking.
Mm.
And the 6 is that um, it's not revolutionary at all. I mean, the thinking has existed well over a century. Right? These aren't novel ideas; they just haven't been communicated in a contemporary frame so that they're able to be leveraged today.
Yes.
So, to your earlier point, I think about myself as a cultural translator because I'm just translating. I am taking
Mm.
the literature, the text that's been articulated by people a million times smarter than me, and I'm translating it so that contemporary leaders, CEOs, marketers, managers, entrepreneurs, activists, politicians, and the like, so they
Mm.
can understand that work, that text, and go, oh,
Mm.
that applies to this thing. I can do that too. And this has always been the delta, the gap between academia and practice,
Mm.
right? Like, we write in a very technical language, technical style as scholars.
Mm.
So the translation over to practitioners, there's always some anemia there. And I try to bridge the academic practitioner gap by translating. And once I translate that to companies, they go, oh, I never thought about it that way. And
Yes.
it's not
Yes.
that, like, I've never heard anything like that before. This is so revelatory. It's so revolutionary and evolutionary to what we do. It goes, I just never thought about it like that.
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
that ideas are so foreign. I just never looked at it through this frame. Now with this frame, I go, oh, I think I know how to use it. Or at least I try to help those practitioners use it.
That's a great way
And
to do
then
it.
as the translator, I now say, okay, so let's take all of the cultural characteristics of your company and let's translate it to these groups of people that's trying to get to adopt behavior. And the way we're going to do that is by taking all the cultural characteristics of these people and translate it to why it's congruent with who you are as a company.
Yeah, that's
And
fantastic.
in doing so, you find connection.
I get that. I buy it in every sense. Let's delve a little bit more into you now, and some of perhaps the advice you might give to others coming through, perhaps earlier in their life, whether they're at school or university, and they've got big dreams,
Mhm.
aspirations, and they want to do real stuff in the world, and perhaps they'll have a leadership role in an organization. Um, the thing that strikes me about many leaders at the moment is that they have had often quite linear, sort of straight paths, at least visibly. You may not know what goes on behind the scenes,
Yeah.
but your path has been, I would say, creative, meandering in different spaces. Um, what advice would you give to a younger person looking to do big things in the world?
Yeah, my background has been a long and windy road, I like to think of it. But I'm grateful for it because the heterogeneity of those different experiences create a very specific lens by which I see the world. I
Yes,
studied
yes,
engineering in university in undergrad, and though I'm not an engineer, I'm not a practiced engineer. I look at the world through engineering lenses. I'm always looking for the system of things. No
yes,
surprise that I find myself thinking about culture through systems like
Yes.
those early
Yes.
scholars. I'm always looking for the system and things. I used to be a songwriter, right? I wrote love songs for a living. And that helps me see the world through a empathetic lens. Right?
Mm.
Think about how can I say, use words in such a way that people don't just hear them, but they feel them,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
it requires being cognitively empathetic to take off my lenses, put the lenses on of someone else, and look at how they may translate it. Right. I talk about this in the book that playwrights know this better than anyone. They write things realizing that what the person says on stage is going to be translated by the person who's observing it. So
Yes.
I'm writing as the conduit to the translator. And
Mm.
as a songwriter, that's how I think. Like I'm writing these words that this person is going to sing as the vehicle by which these words are going to be
Yes. Love that.
heard, but the listener is the one who's going to be making meaning of it. So as a songwriter, I'm constantly just thinking of things from an empathic way. And then as a marketer, my job is to get people to move, get people to
Yeah,
adopt
that's a great way of
behavior.
putting it. That's a great way of putting it. Just on the song front, obviously you were given the role of being head of digital strategy for Beyonce and other artists in the portfolio. I mean, that's a big old job, not just for her but for anyone. At a relatively young age, how did you deal with it? How did you deal with the pressure? In a
I think
nutshell.
I fortunately had a chance to work at Apple beforehand. And this is at a time, I mean, Apple's been crushing for a long time, but this is, I think of these are sort of the golden years of Apple. You've got
Mm.
iTunes, iPod, iPhone, the iPad. You've got uh, Steve Jobs is Steve Jobs. Like all these things happening at the same time. The App Store, all these things happening at the same time. Like I was working at Apple during those times, and the reverberation of their impact was globally massive.
Absolutely.
Beyonce, massive, no doubt. But the iPod,
Yeah.
the iPhone held a different kind of consecration at the time. So I kind of, I guess I was sort of uh, studied or tested in working with these things that have great cultural impact. So I
Yes.
approached my time work with Beyonce with a level of sacredness, if you will, that she means something a lot to a lot of people. But I was always able to sort of check and balance it with, but like her impact isn't as big as the iPhone.
Okay, that's a great way to put it. That's a great way to put it. Let's drill down even further. I mean, if you're willing to share, give me these few examples of the congregations and tribes within them that you belong to.
Oh yeah, I'm a Collins. That's my familial tribe. We believe family and church come first, right? And the way I see the world and operate through the world is through that lens. That's where I prioritize my time, my effort, and my energy. I'm also a Michigan Wolverine as a alumni here twice over, and now a professor. My identity is definitely anchored in being a part of this community, and as a result, I subscribe to and adhere to the conventions and expectations of what it means to be Michigan Wolverine. I consider myself a Christian.
Mm.
And because of that subscription, I adhere to a certain set of beliefs and ideologies that manifest through the way I show up in
Yes.
in the world. I like to think of myself as a musician, right, which is a big congregation, and in that congregation there are many different tribes. There's hip hop musicians, then also different kind of factions of hip hop musicians within that tribe. I think of myself as a musician, and ergo there's certain expectations and conventions, right? Like I tell this to my students all the time. There's something that musicians call the stank face, particularly in like soul, hip hop, R&B, funk music, gospel music too. That if someone's playing and you go, ooh, ooh. Now, if you're a classical musician, you see that face and go, I must be doing something wrong.
Yeah.
I
Absolutely. Yeah.
haven't played a bad note. But if you are a soul musician, you go, oh, I'm killing it right now. Look at those
Absolutely.
faces, right?
Absolutely.
So having that proximity to those tribes allows you to see what those code words, those secret sort of nuanced gestures mean, and
Mm.
those are a few of the tribes to which I belong, and I think that those in particular, they keep me on straight and narrow.
Yeah.
At least they
It's
become the checks and balances by which I guide what I do. I mean, of course, there's a scholar and marketer as well.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it shows the richness of life, of your life, and I guess it shows the opportunity for people, because some people I think might think, "Oh, I'm not sure who I belong to and what I belong
Yeah,
to," and perhaps there's a lack of connectivity. But it perhaps is an impetus to say, actually, there's lots of groups that either you were part of, you could reinvest,
that's right.
re-engage with, or start again. So as we draw to a close, a couple of last questions I always ask guests. One is, what impact are you looking to have on the world around you?
Oh, wow. I believe that we're all put on this earth to serve God and serve each other. That's what I believe. And the way in which I serve is to help people realize their highest fidelity, right? The highest version of themselves. I just so happen to write books and teach and put ideas in the world. But ultimately, that's the impact that I want to make, to help people be the best versions of themselves,
That's
and
beautiful.
all the many modalities in which I can do that.
That's brilliant and beautiful. And then when you're absolutely crushing it, you're having your best day possible, what mindsets and practices help you?
Um, I realize that I'm just a vessel, that none of this is me, that I've been given some some innate talents that I was able to hone over the years. I've been given sets of people throughout my life that have invested in me, and the opportunities that were given to me were not because of me. And therefore, I approach it all with a tremendous, tremendous amount of gratitude, realizing that uh, this is not of me, and everything that I have, good and bad, quite frankly, is a gift. And with that, it's hard to be disappointed and upset when you're grateful.
Well, that takes your breath away. That's very moving. That's very poignant, and that's a great way to end. And it's refreshing for somebody who's clearly so talented to have that depth and breadth of of perspective on life. Which is driven by your family background, your spiritual beliefs, and so on. So big credit to you, Marcus. We could talk for hours, but you're a man not in a hurry, but you're a man with a mission. So I'll leave you to do that. Thank you ever so much for this wonderful, wonderful conversation. That was another edition of Lancefield on the Line. I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please do check out the other episodes in the series. Sign up to the podcast, the YouTube channel. And if you're feeling exceptionally grateful, give me a nice rating. And I guess be part of the tribe, be part of the congregation, to use this phrase. Marcus, thank you ever so much again.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.